But first, just with regards to the sources that you saw, before we get into things, I just wanted to talk about, I guess, where the theme of the talks that the members of the Kol are giving right now. It's in between Yom HaAtzmaut and Yom Yerushalayim. We're dealing with matters of Medinah Yisrael and the beautiful reality that we have a country to call our own. But with regards to liturgy and how exactly it affects our observance, even for people that are living in the diaspora. So I think it's very clear to us if you see all the commotion about what to say. Do you say Hallel? Do you say with a bracha, etc. All of the hack. We're very nervous about making changes. It's something that I almost anybody that tries to have these conversations with me about did you say with the bracha, did you not, etc. Like on Yom HaAtzmaut itself, it bothers me, and it's certainly a halakhic issue we have to deal with. How do you respond in terms of what you say, etc. But on the day itself, it just seems like it's people just it's just a way to I guess make us feel more pessimistic about things. That this is something that's not agreed upon by everybody, etc. I'm curious, what do they do here?
We don't recite bracha on Medinah.
Okay, is anything at Mariv? Anything?
No. In this far we do have kappas on the night before.
Okay, but in any event, something that comes out of the reality that we're nervous about making a bracha. For example, we're nervous about making changes to what we have. Our tefillos. It's difficult to move from, even though we do believe that the building of Medinah Yisrael is something that's bringing us much closer to the Geula, and it's something that should perhaps be reflected in our tefillos and in the way we act and the way we observe our mitzvahs. So it's something we're hesitant to change. We're kind of in a little bit of a gullus mentality, not just in regards to the fact that we live here, the fact that we're not zochet to so many mitzvahs that Eretz Yisrael has, but also in our liturgy. If you think about it, what's going to happen? If you've ever thought about this hypothetically, what's going to happen when Mashiach comes? You take the first LL flight to Eretz Yisrael, and all of a sudden you're eating your meal on the plane, and you have to bench. What are you going to do? The Geulah has come, Mashiach's come. What are you going to say for benching? Are you going to say Rachim Na Hashem Elokeinu Yisrael Amecha? Are you going to ask for the building of Yerushalayim? Would it make sense? If you want to daven mincha in the airport, what are you going to say? You realize that so many of our brachas, so many of the things that we say, they're geared towards a galus life, towards not living a life of geula. That I don't know. You'd probably have to ask your Rav before you take the flight out to know just what exactly am I doing here for the next couple of days before Anshe Knesset HaGedolah gets back together and we institute tefillos, etc. Even nowadays also, we have issues on Tisha B'Av. You say Nachim, and if you read the text of Nachim, it seems to be a little bit dated. You take a look at the text, it seems to indicate that it talks about Yerushalayim being in ruins, etc. And that's not so true nowadays. So how do we respond? Do we change the text of Nachim, someone on Tisha B'Av, to reflect the reality that nowadays we're living in a time where Eretz Yisrael is being inhabited, it's being built up, it's being we still have a lot to go for sure, but that there's significant changes that we should perhaps reflect on when we're davening, whenever we're doing whatever we do. So besides Lasid Lavo, when the Geula Shlema will come, also nowadays, sorry for being a little low, I'll speak up a little bit more. What about not just Yom HaAtzmaut nowadays, but I also wanted to talk about something that we're a little familiar with. This is something that we just went through. We just had the holiday of Pesach. Should the holiday of Pesach in any way change based on the fact that now we live in Eretz Yisrael? That there's a very solid argument that I think you can make to show that perhaps there should be some differences between what we've done in the past in our Haggadot, and what we said in Magid, and what we should be saying nowadays to reflect the reality that we've come to Eretz Yisrael and that we have a land. So I wanted to talk about the possibility of changing the Seder in some way. We're very nervous about changing the Seder, changing our very fixed text for the Haggadah, right? It comes from, let's be honest about where does this hesitancy come from to change liturgy, to change anything? It comes from the past couple of hundred years where there's been pushes from non-Orthodox movements that have wanted to institute changes in the tefillah. And if you ever look at the works of Chief Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs. So he talks very often about how the Seder, it's meant to be our book of Emunah. It's meant to communicate the very essence of what we believe in, and that we don't just study the things we believe in, but that we actually we cry it out, that we say it in our tefillos. And because of that, I mean, people were in tune to that hundreds of years ago, when they wanted to make changes, not just in practice, but also in what's the philosophy of a Jew in the modern world. So very often they had a perspective of taking things out. They wanted to take out mentions of Yerushalayim, mentions of Eretz Yisrael, mentions of Mashiach, of yearning for something more. They wanted to feel perhaps more ingrained in the society that they were a part of, to fit in more, and they tried taking things out. There was a lot of resistance, obviously, and I think people have come around in every denomination that there is, of accepting Eretz Yisrael, accepting the hope of a Mashiach in one way or another. But that's really where it comes from, this hesitancy to introduce changes in our prayers. If you look, the Seder is actually a compilation of different tefillos from throughout the ages. It's really it is a changing text in many ways, but nowadays we have a hesitancy to do so for obvious reasons. And you could be the most Zionistic person in the world in Yom HaAtzmaut if you ever look at what's the Tefillah Chagigi on Maariv. It's just copied things. It's a few paragraphs from Lechadodi, Prakim of Tehillim, etc. Things that certainly have that address Medinah Yisrael and the reality that we now have a land, and that's something to thank Hashem for. But at the same time, there's a lack of originality in it, because we're afraid. We're afraid to make changes. We're afraid to do things that are too drastic. But anyways, the Seder is perhaps one of those things that maybe we can introduce some changes. So before we go to the next source sheet, and the one that you've seen, the one that you've looked at the sources previously, we'll skip the first question. But the second question, how does the Mishnah's description of the Seder differ from what we do in practice? Anybody have any ideas? There's one that jumps out at you.
Stewed beef.
Huh?
Stewed beef.
Stewed beef, right. But if you look, this is essentially, this is the Manish Tanas in this Mishnah. You have the child, or perhaps if you read the Mishnah in one way, it sounds like the father is actually asking these questions, and not really asking, more like saying, how different is this night from other nights? Trying to get the kid to say, yeah, you're right, it is, why? But the questions are pretty familiar to us, except for one of them. One of them mentions, Shebechol haleilos, on all nights. I'm reading in the middle of the paragraph, in that second paragraph. Anu ochlin basar tzali shalok amavushal. We can eat either roasted or cooked meat. Halayla azeh kulo tzali. And tonight, though, we're eating only roasted meat. That's according to only one opinion, by the way, in the Gemara, in the Mishnah, that even the karban chagiga, even the other karbanos and meat that we eat, has to be roasted. In some ways, that practice is reflected nowadays. Some people have the minhag not to eat roasted meat on the Seder to show that we don't have the karban pesach, etc.
Right.
But in any event, that's not in our 4 questions nowadays. Any reason? Can anybody imagine why? There's no karban pesach. There is no. At least if we forget the minhag for now, some people don't have this minhag. From the halakhic perspective, at least, there's no requirement to eat roasted meat only, and there's no karban pesach that would reflect this reality. So we have a 4th question that's not in this Mishnah. What's the one that's missing? Can anybody think of the other question? The dipping's in here.
Oh, it's there. Sorry.
Right, the one about reclining. The one about reclining that we have in Manish Tana that we know of. So that's not in this Mishnah. And the way to explain it most simply is it was added to be a replacement question. And it's actually not relevant at all in the times of the Mishnah, because back then they actually did eat all their meals reclining. It wasn't something that was strange. It wasn't something that would bring the kids' attention. But you already start to see the idea that our Haggadah, what we say in Magid, is a little different from what the Mishnah at least prescribes for us. Okay, so the next question, you might notice it's somewhat related to this one. Is there anything else that stands out in this Mishnah? This is a little bit harder. Did anybody pick up on something else that was missing, perhaps? This is a lack of omission also. It's related to the following 2 sources afterwards as well. Just to I'll cut to the chase. The Mishnah tells us at the very end, it says, "V'dorish me'arami oved avi ad sheyigmor kol ha'parsha kula." You should expound on the passage of Arami oved avi, the passage that a farmer says when he brings his bikurim, his first fruits, to the Beit Midrash. So he says a number of psukim. Arami oved avi is how it starts, and you might be familiar with it from the Haggadah itself. But if you look, and it's in the 3rd source, the words that the farmer says, it continues. There's more that's said than we actually expound on in the Haggadah. This we're perhaps less familiar with because, at that point in the Seder, you're usually pretty hungry, already on your way to the meal. You're kind of excited to get to cut to the chase. But anyways, if you look in pasuk, let me see, what pasuk is it? Pasuk Tes. in the third source, the last pasuk, it's basically a synopsis as a whole of what the farmer is saying. He tells over the whole Yetzias Mitzrayim story in short. And he says, God took us out after we were going through much suffering. And then the last pasuk is, in pasuk tes, Vayivienu el hamakom hazeh, and he brought us to this place, Vayitin lanu es haaretz hazos, he gave us this land, Eretz zavas kalav udvash, a land flowing with milk and honey. And then he continues to say, and now I'm bringing these first fruits to you, God, I'm very thankful. And I want to dedicate the very first part of my yield for this year. I want to dedicate that to you to show that this is really all because of you. This is all because of the Geula, the bringing of us to the land that you've done for us. But that pasuk's not in the Haggadah. If you look in Arami Oved Avi, we go through the first 4 pasukim that recount the Yetzias Mitzrayim, that story. But this last pasuk of bringing us into the land, not there. We don't say that in our Haggadah, despite the fact that the Mishnah seems to indicate that you should say the entire passage that the farmer says when he brings Bikurim. We should say the whole thing the Mishnah seems to indicate. The Rambam in the following source also says it. We won't do it inside, but it's missing. We don't have that pasuk of Vayavienu, that God brings us into the land. So that's another difference. And then the last source, did anybody get the question for? There's a theme that's evoked in these psukim. This is in Parshas Va'era. This is after Moshe complains to Hashem, you sent me here to take the Jewish people out. Now all of a sudden things are getting worse. Paro's not even giving them straw to build the bricks with. Their labor is becoming even harder because I tried to get involved. And then Hashem tells Moshe, okay, now the Geula process is going to start. I'll tell you everything that's going to happen. Anybody notice any key words here in these psukim that have a Seder theme to them? Yeah. Right, Zichron DOV, that's definitely a theme that's evoked in the Haggadah. There's something specific that I'm focusing on. There's 4 words, or perhaps 5, 4 words that stand out in these psukim that you might recognize from a question that's famously asked at the Haggadah, in Magid. But we could cut to the chase. So if you look, the languages used by Hashem in these psukim are the 4 lashonos shel geula, so to speak. Right? We talk about why are there 4 cups of wine. So the Gemara, the Yerushalmi, there's actually a number of reasons given as to why we have 4 cups. But I think the primary reason, the first one that's given, the one that we typically answer if somebody asks us that question, it's because of the 4 lashonos, the 4 languages of geula. Right? That God says He's going to save us. What each of these terms mean, each layer of meaning that it contributes, we'll have to get into. But each one is a language of God taking us out of the land of Egypt and saving us. But here also something seems to be missing. Right? If you notice in these psukim, these are all languages that God is using. He's going to save the Jewish people, etc. And we, after the fact, we say, oh, these are the 4 languages of Geula. That's why we have 4 cups. But if you analyze the psukim more carefully, it seems like there's actually another word that should be used. There should be a 5th word. So the last pasuk ches, it says, right? And I will bring these people, the Jewish people, into the land. The land that I promised to your forefathers, I'm going to give it over to them as an inheritance. I am God. So if we were to ask ourselves, why do we have 4 cups? Oh, because of the 4 languages of Geula. It begs asking, so why does there seem to be a 5th language of Geula here? We talk about there being 4, but it seems like, every word that's appended to Eschem, what I God am going to do to them, there's something missing here. It seems like there should be a 5th word, and we should have a 5th cup perhaps.
And we do for Eliyahu.
So we'll talk about exactly what we do for Eliyahu. We'll get to that. But those are the basic questions that I think come out of this that first sheet. It's one of the questions that I wanted to stir in the mind, is to make us realize something, which is a fundamental idea, and it's in the first source in the second sheet that you brought out. This is a tshuva of the Malame the Hoel. This is Rabbi David Zvi Hoffman. He lived in 1800s, 1900s in Germany. He was somebody that subscribed to at least the Orthodox form of the science of Judaism. I don't know if I pronounced the German correctly, the Wissenschaft. So anyways, so he was very into in some ways the academic study of Talmud, of the Mishnah, of understanding how things perhaps progressed in their development. And one of the questions he's asked in this tshuva, I think we're going to do it all outside for the sake of time. But somebody asks him the question that we asked earlier. I look in this Mishnah in Pesachim and I see that it seems to tell me that we're supposed to finish the Parsha of Arami Oved Avi, the entire thing, including the last pasuk. And then there's also another mandate that the Mishnah gives me. It tells me, Maskil Beganus Messiah B'Shvach. I'm supposed to start from the Jewish people's downtrodden state, and end when I'm telling my story about their in their more lofty, elevated status. I'm supposed to end with them. They lived happily ever after, in one way or another. So, why exactly are these two separate discussions? It happens to be in the Gemara. If you look, the Gemara asks, what does it mean to start Maskil Beganus Messiah B'Shvach? There are two opinions. One, Rav, who says this in a spiritual sense. You're supposed to talk about how our origins as a people. We started as Ovdei Avodah Zarah, as people that Abraham's father was an idol worshiper, and now Baruch Hashem, after the Gulas Mitzrayim, we became a people with that worship the one true God. And then there's the opinion of Shmuel. He says, no, we're talking about physical slavery. We're talking about being downtrodden, being enslaved by Paro, and that eventually Hashem took us out, and now we're free men. And so the asker of this question to Rav Hoffman, he says, at least according to Shmuel, who says that this is about our physical slavery, why do we have to go into talking about Avadim Hayinu, etc.? Why do we have this separate section of the Haggadah that seems to address Shmuel's understanding of what Maskil Beganus Messiah B'Shvach means? So just look at Arami Oved Avi, which we're doing anyways. That passage, it's a synopsis of the entire Geulas Mitzrayim, and there you're certainly talking about the fact that we started in a low state, we ended in a more lofty state. Why are we bothering to do more? So Rav Hoffman, he introduces a concept that I think we're starting to get to, is that our Haggadah as we have it now, it's the Galus Haggadah. It's the Haggadah of not having a land, not having a Beis HaMikdash, not having the Geula Shalema. Originally, if you look at the Mishnah, Rav Hoffman reads it as you darshan, you expound on the passage of Arami Oved Avi, and then that itself is your Maskil Beganus Messiah B'Shvach. That is how you express it. And what are Rav and Shmuel arguing about? They're not arguing about what you used to do back in the times of the Beis HaMikdash. That's how they did it. They just darshaned Arami Oved Avi, and that was it. But after Galus, after perhaps Jews were living in Bavel, even before the building of the second Beis HaMikdash, even during the building of the existence of the second Beis HaMikdash, people living in Bavel, people that lived in Galus, they wouldn't say the full text of Arami Oved Avi, just like we don't do it nowadays typically. They didn't say that last pasuk of Vayavienu, and now Hashem, the farmer, is saying, now you've brought me to the land, you've brought me to a place where I can farm and I can bring my first fruits to you. They didn't say that because they acknowledged the reality of the fact that they weren't living in Eretz Yisrael right now. They felt that's not the shvach, that's not the highest state we can talk about at the Haggadah, at our Sedarim, because we don't live in Israel. We don't have that land. And Rav Hoffman suggests the Gemara that then discusses how do you do Maskil Beganus Messiah B'Shvach? How do I talk about our downtrodden state progressing to our state of being free men? So that's a discussion of Bidi Eved. That nowadays that we don't have a Beis HaMikdash anymore, we're not doing the entire text of Arami Oved Avi. Now, what are we going to do instead? And there's one opinion that says you start from Avadim Hayinu. The other says no, you start with Mitchila Hayu Ovdei Avodah Zarah Hayavasenu. You talk about our spiritual, lowness, how we started. But in any event, this is all b'diavad, according to Rabbi Hoffman. At the end of the day, when the Geula Shalema will come, you're going to revert back to whatever we were saying in the past. It's just Arami Oved Avi. That'll suffice, and you're going to actually say the last pasuk Vayavienu. God, and you brought me to this land, because then it'll be a reality. The Torah Tamima of Baruch Epstein in the next source, so he addresses the four Lashonos of the Geula that we talk about. Why do we have four cups? Right? So everybody knows it's because of the four languages of Geula, as we discussed previously. We asked the question of why isn't there a fifth? So Rav Hoffman, Rabbi Epstein, after noting what each language contributes, he says the first one is Votzeti, is talking about the fact that we were taken out of the severity of the bondage. That it wasn't just exhausting to us to be enslaved in the way that the Egyptians treated us so bitterly, more so than perhaps your standard slave would expect. V'itzalti is to tell us that we stopped working entirely. In the middle of the Makos, they just stopped enslaving us. But we were still living in Egypt. We were still, at least in identity, their slaves. Ve'ga'alti, in the next language, the next level is Hashem taking us out. He's actually taking us out of Egypt. Ve'lakachti. And then God actually, besides taking us away from our relationship with the Egyptian people, He added a new dimension, and now we're God's people that were theirs. And then He says in the second paragraph of that second source of the Torah Tamima, He says, "Umashalo tiknu kos hodal inyan vehevesi." How come we don't have a fifth cup that actually corresponds to the last word, vehevesi, that I'm going to bring you into the land of Israel? Eschem el haaretz, right? That I'm bringing you into the land. The ein lomar mipnei she'enu me'inyan ha'geula. don't tell me that this isn't the matter of the gula itself. Shahari kamokain tiknu l'inyan velakachti. The word velakachti of having an extra relationship with God, that itself also isn't inherently a part of the geula. Geula is leaving Egypt. It's not necessarily the next level of being close to Hashem. But the Torah Tamima notes, velakachti counts for a cup, right? That special relationship adds as a cup. So Vehevesi should have the same treatment. So he says, Yish lomar pashit mipnei shabiyoso ata begolos v'ha'aretz mesura bidei zarim. It seems clear to me that the fact that we're in Gullus, we're living in a land that's not ours. Yefshar lisa kos yayin alzeh. We can't have a fifth cup to correspond to Vehevesi, to the fact that we're in the land, because we're not in the land. V'ulayla zeker zeh tiknu kos miyuchad l'shmo shel Eliyahu. Perhaps for this very reason, we have the Koshal Eliyahu Hanavi, the Zichron V'remesh anu mekavim leviyasav v'tchiyas ha'uma v'ha'aretz, to express our hope, to hint to that we want Eliyahu Hanavi to come. Eliyahu is the harbinger of the Geula. We want to remind ourselves that we yearn for that. We yearn to reach the level of Vehevesi, and that's why we don't have a fifth cup. It sounds like from Rabbi Epstein that what will happen when we eventually come into the land? Switch to what? Vehevesi. We'll have a Vehevesi. We'll be in the land. We'll be able to have a fifth cup, right? Now, on the level of hashkafa, this is certainly very nice. Like we talked about earlier, there's a hesitancy to introduce changes into liturgy, into practice, because changes in the past couple of hundred years have been introduced to really destroy the core of what Judaism is. So there, if we don't have any halachic backing to actually do something like this, it's a nice idea in theory, right? But with these ideas, can you actually take it to the step of the practical? Can you actually have a fifth cup of the Seder, right? Besides just the one waiting for Eliyahu, can I actually drink a fifth cup? Can I have something in my Seder that seems to express this idea of now Hashem brought us into the land? So there actually is such a precedent. But if you look in the first source, it doesn't. In the next source, it doesn't seem to be the case. You look in the Gemara in Pesachim Kuf Yud Zayin Amud Beis. This is the next Mishnah after the one that you saw in the previous sheet. Mazgulo koshalishi, you now mix the third cup of wine. This is after your meal. Mavarech al mazono, and then you bench over that cup, and then you make a ber pri al gafen after birchas hamazon. Revi gomer alav es halal. On the fourth cup, you finish the halal. Va'omer alav birchas ashir. You say the halal as we know. You finish it, right? Because the first two paragraphs of Halal we actually say at the end of Magid. We kind of make a split. If you remember from your Sedarim this past year. It says you finish the Halal and then you say Birchas Hashir. The Gemara is going to explain, we don't have to go through it inside, but it says, what is Birchas Hashir? Birchas Hashir is just that last paragraph of Halal that we know, the one that you say in davening, when on Rosh Chodesh or whatever it is, Yehalalucha Hashem, and then you end Melch Mulaba Tishbafos. So we end there. Beina kosel salalu, in between these cups, in between the second and third, if you want to drink, fine. Bein shlishi l'revi lo yishta, in between the third and the fourth, don't drink. It's an issue that we're not going to get into. The Gemara says, "My birchas hashir." What is this birchas hashir that you're talking about? That you say halal and this birchas hashir over the fourth cup. Rabbi Yehuda Omar Yahalucha Hashem Elokeinu. It's the paragraph that we know. Rabbi Yochanan Omar Nishmas Kol Chai. It's the paragraph of Nishmas that goes into Yishtabach. We do both nowadays, right? We say Yahalucha. We don't end with the bracha that Halalucha usually ends with when we say Hallel, but instead we say Nishmas, and then we go basically the way you would continue in a Shachris on Shabbos or Yom Tov until you get to Yishtabach. You close with that bracha. Tanu Rabbanan. Now here's the crucial idea here. Our rabbis taught Revi'i Gomer Alav Esahalo, Va'omer Halal Hagadol. On the fourth cup, this is saying something a little bit different from the Mishnah. You finish Halal, and then you also say Halal Hagadol. Halal Hagadol is Per Kuf Lamed Vav, I believe, in Tehillim. Hodul Hashem Kitov Kilo Amchasto. All the Kilo Amchastos is that paragraph. Divrei Rabbi Tarfon. Rabbi Tarfon says, seemingly from the Gemara, the text of the Gemara we have, you say the fourth, you say not just Halal, but also Halal Hagadol Hodul Hashem Kitov Kilo Amchasto over the cup of wine, the fourth cup, which is what we do in practice in our Sedarim typically. V'yesh Omrim, others say Hashem Roi Lo Echsar. Instead of Hodul Hashem Kitov, you say the parak that we know from Shalosh Shudas on Shabbos, Hashem Roi Lo Echsar, etc. Now, that's the text as we have it in the Gemara. The Rashbam, in his commentary there, he says, Hachi Garsinan, this is what the text should read, which already should be a tip-off to you that it's not necessarily. It sounds like there was murmurings against this. But, Revi'i Gomer Alav Esahalo. Revi'i Gomer Esahalo. Our rabbis taught on the fourth one, you finish Halal, but Omer Alav Halal Hagadol. And you also say over it, the great Halal. But if you look in Rabbeinu Chananel, already a hint to perhaps something else being done here. Tanu Rabbanan, and I have in parentheses here Chamishi, and in brackets Revi'i. Does anybody know the typical practice? You look in a Gemara, you look in any text. What's the rule? What do I read in the parentheses? What do I read? Do I read what's in the parentheses or what's in the brackets when I'm faced with a choice? Any idea? The typical rule is the brackets have been the accepted text, and parentheses is an amendation that this must have been wrong, we should change it. Very often when people make amendations, they don't even make any mention of what the text previously was, because they feel so sure, so correct about what the text should be, that when they change it, they say, why should I bother everybody else with getting confused? So, but Baruch Hashem, this time whoever was making the amendations to Rabbeinu Hananel, he noted, I think the language should be Revi'i. That's why I'm putting it in the brackets. But the word Chamishi, that was in my manuscript. That's what was there. So Omer Alav Halal Hagadol Devei Rabbi Tarfon. That on the fifth cup, in the parentheses, on the fifth cup, a person is supposed to say the great Halal Hodu LaHashem Ki Tov Ki L'Olam Chasto. And we went through the next couple of sources inside. But basically, the Rush, he says there actually is in fact the text of fifth. The Rashbam is the one that changed it, and a couple of others followed suit afterwards. But if you look at the text, it has most people have it. The text was on the fifth cup, you say Halal Hagadol, you say Hodu L'Hashem Ki Tov Ki L'Olam Chasto. Now we think, what's going on? And we understand the person that made that change in Rabbeinu Hananel. Fifth cup, what are you talking about? Nobody's ever heard of such a thing. And that's the Rashbam's argument also. He gets rid of the word Chamishi, he changes it to Revi, because there's 4 cups, end of story. But not so pashut, not so simple. And the Rashi goes on to quote many shitas that seem to indicate that there was a fifth cup. What exactly do you do with this? So he maintained that it was, I believe it was an option. The minhag is not to. And people, the reason why the Rosh says he thinks it's better that you don't do it is because there's all this tumult about whether this word belongs here or not. People are, there's a mitzvah to be talking about Yetzias Mitzrayim the entire evening until you pass out. So because of that, maybe you go a little bit easy on the wine. It's gonna make you more tired, more drowsy, and you're not going to be able to do more of the mitzvah as you perhaps would like. But then if you look also in the language of the Rambam, here I have a translation. There's one accessible. If you ever want a translation for the Mishnah Torah, for the Rambam's halachic work, it's all on Chabad has a website where they have free translations for the Rambam's Mishnah Torah. So that's how you have it here. But let's just read the English real quick. The Rambam says in Hilchos Kamei Tumatzah, he says, afterwards he washes his hands and recites the grace after meals over a third cup of wine and drinks it. Afterwards he pours out a fourth cup and completes the Hallel over it, reciting upon it the blessing of song. That's to say, may all your works praise you, God. Right? That's the Halucha Hashem Kol Ma'asecha. That's the Bircha Shira, as we mentioned earlier. He recites the blessing, B'rei Pri Agafen, and he drinks the wine. That's not what we do. Anybody really know what we do? We don't say bracha at the end of the halalucha. We then continue. Hodu L'Hashem Ki Tov Ki L'Olam Chasto. We say nishmas. We go to yishtabach. Then we finish with yishtabach, that bracha, and then we make the bracha on our fourth kos. But now he says, let's say you're making your bracha at the end of your halalucha, at the end of, I guess, what we would call typically our formal halal. Right? Now he says, afterwards he does not taste anything, with the exception of water throughout the entire night. Right? We know the idea of not trying to get rid of the taste of the afikomen lingering in our mouth, no more eating anything else, perhaps even drinking, according to the Rambam. But then he says, it is permissible to fix a fifth cup and recite upon it the great halal. Say halal hagadol. Say Hodu L'Hashem Ki Tov Ki L'Olam Chasto.
Would you say it again if you said it?
So there's a lot of discussion of, let's say I want to do a fifth cup. How exactly do I do it? How do I change from what I have printed in my Haggadah? So that's a complicated topic. I'd say the most basic way seemingly to do it would be as the Rambam's prescribing. You say, basically you finish halal the way we would typically finish halal in our tefillos. You'd make your bracha on the fourth cup, drink it, and then you'd say halal hagadol. And then finish perhaps nishmas, go until yishtabach, then say the end of the yishtabach bracha, and then say fifth cup bracha, drink, and then maybe not a bracha, maybe the bracha rishon is already made in that sense. It's complicated how exactly you would do it. If you ever plan on doing it, consult
Confident
halachic authority. But anyways, he says, give thanks. So then the Rambam says, say Hodu L'Hashem Ki Tov Ki L'Olam Chasto until Al Naharos Bavel, meaning until the end of that parak. Al Naharos Bavel is the next paragraph in Tehillim, and he says this cup is not an obligation like the other cups. He seems to indicate that it's something you could do. Right? And the Ran, in his commentary on the Rif also had the text of the fifth cup, and the Ran says this is actually perhaps mitzvah min hamuvchar, that this is not obligatory. You don't need to have a fourth cup like a fifth cup like the rabbis obligated you to have 4. But the fifth, it's the best way to do the mitzvah. Have the fifth, that would be great. And the Shulchan Aruch, in terms of how we paskin practically, the Mechaber, the posik for Sfardim, he says achar arba kosos ein rashai lishtos yayin, after the first 4 cups. No more drinking wine, elamayim, only water if you want. So it sounds like, and there's no mention on his part of a fifth cup at all. He doesn't seem to be so into this idea. He perhaps accepts the Rashbam's amendation of the text. And then the Haggadah, the Ramah says, V'chol ha'mashkin dino kayayin, all drinks in fact have the status of wine. Don't drink anything else besides water. But somebody that's perhaps finicky, for some reason he feels like he really wants to have wine, or he's somebody that greatly desires wine for whatever reason, he can drink a fifth cup, but Yomer Alav Halal Gadol, provided that he says the great Halal Hodu Lashem Kitov Ki Lalam Chasto over it. So the Ramah seems to give us an option here, that we're allowed to do this. According to the Ran, according to a number of other authorities, it's perhaps mitzvah min amuvchar, at the very least something that's optional, that a person is allowed to do. And based on all the ideas that we've brought forth so far, it sounds like it would have a lot of symbolism to it. It would have a tremendous level of significance. It would parallel Behevesi, that fifth language of Geula, that God brings us into the land. It would allow us perhaps to darshan. This is another change that perhaps we should talk about in the Haggadah. When we say Arami Oved Avi and we stop at that last pasuk, we don't say that last pasuk of God bringing us into the land. Maybe in fact we should darshan it. Maybe we should express the fact that God did bring us into the land, because Baruch Hashem, nowadays we have in Medinah Yisrael, we have control, we have we're there, it's ours. And with that option, perhaps we should do it. I was told that Rabbi Riskin apparently does it on Friday. We met, and Rabbi Riskin, he does this Kos Chamishi at his Sedarim. And
I'm not sure what bracha he says over it.
How exactly he structures his bracha, his text, that's something to ask also. But besides Rabbi Riskin, this was an idea that's not so Mekudash. This is already in 1949. This is a sefer down here of Menachem Mendel Kasher, who is a tremendous Talmud Chacham. If you ever read his work, the Torah Shalema, right? He has an encyclopedic work that goes through all the psukim of the Torah, at least the first four books of the Torah he managed to do before he passed away. That it quotes every medrash, every idea you can imagine that relates to a given pasuk. He compares texts. He was very he knew pretty much all the literature cold. And he has an essay called Kos Chamishi, where he demonstrates that even for Sfardim, perhaps, he thinks they should do a fifth cup. He looked just on halakhic grounds, before we get into the hashkafic ideals of what's going on. He says, if you look at the exchange between the Beis Yosef, the author of the Shulchan Aruch, and how he analyzes this issue of a fifth cup, it seems like he had corrupt texts of a discussion between Rav Haigon and Rav Sadia going about what to do with regards to this fifth cup, that he seemed to have an indication that others didn't have this text in the Gemara at all. He felt there's more reason to say that this is all, narishkeit, this fifth cup idea. But Rav Kasher explains, now that we have manuscripts in our control, I'm not going to bore you with the details, but if you look, it's a long article that analyzes everything that's out there on this topic. And he says, we see that, in fact, pretty much everybody had this text. The Rashbam came around and he perhaps introduced this change, but everybody before him, everybody had this text in the Gemara of a fifth cup. He says, for that reason, it seems to be much more plausible that this fifth cup is not something made up. It's something that we should, that we can practice at the very least. And he recommends that we should. If you look at the last source here, Rav Kasher in his Haggadah Pesach Yisraelis. It was a Haggadah that he made in 1948, I believe, right after the Jewish people got the land of Israel. They declared the state. That the language he uses is truly inspiring. He says, now in our time, we managed to see the greatness of Hashem. We see that He's redeemed us. He's given us the salvation. He's given us a state. He quotes the Vehevesi pasuk, and he says, we're fulfilling this. You should do it. It's the best way to do this mitzvah of not just the arba kosas, to add a fifth. Shu neged behevesi. This is in connection with that fifth language of Geula. I will bring you to the land. V'lomer alav halal hagadol. Say over this the great halal. Say, Hodu Lashem Kitov Ki Olam Chasta. When you're going to as you end the parak, you're going to come into Shibashifleinu Zachar Lanu. In our downtrodden state, you remembered us. In the wake of the Holocaust, V'Yifrakenu Mitzarenu, you took us out of the hands of our enemies. U'Lahodos Lashem Lanisim Alaniflos Valamilchomos V'Atashua She'asa Lanu B'Yameinu. We should thank God for the many miracles and wonders that He performed for us in giving us the land in these days. And just to we can end here. The language he uses is beautiful. To continue the paragraph, he says, it would be a crime to not do this, to not be able to thank Hashem and to acknowledge the fact that we've reached the stage that according to Rav Hoffman, we changed the Haggadah in the past because we weren't in Eretz Yisrael yet. We didn't have the land, and that's why we have the Galus Haggadah. We say Halach Ma'anya, right? We never talked about that yet in the first source sheet. Why do we talk about Halach Ma'anya? Why do we talk about This year we're not in our land, next year we'll be in Jerusalem. This year we're slaves, next year we'll be free. That was meant to be a paragraph that introduced the Haggadah in saying, this is the Galus Haggadah. This is the Haggadah that expresses that we're not at the peak of what we should be. And nowadays, Baruch Hashem, it could be that you would do away with this. This is for the halakhic deciders to decide, and like we said, we're very conservative in our approach about introducing changes to prayers, to the Haggadah for sure. But as you see, there's precedent there. There's this idea of a Haggadah, a text that we used in the times of the Geula, in the times of having the land. And there's a Haggadah that became more popular after we became Golos Jews. But now, Baruch Hashem, if you're living in the land of Eretz Yisrael, perhaps for us too, but certainly if you're living in the land, Rav Kasher thinks it would be very appropriate. It would be very appropriate to acknowledge the Geula, to acknowledge this gift that Hashem gave us, and to thank Him not just in however we observe Yom HaAtzmaut, but perhaps also in our Sedarim. We should acknowledge the fact that we've reached a certain level, a fifth cup, that we've managed to come to that point. He apparently, according to Nechama Leibovitz, Rav Kasher, he approached the Rabbanut in Israel. He said you should make this you should mainstream this. I think this is a great idea. It makes a lot of sense. It didn't pass for I guess the reasons that we're not so sure. Should we be doing this? There's certainly a number of Rishonim that would indicate that there's no such concept as a fifth cup. Like you mentioned about the Koshel Eliyahu. At the very least, you have a Koshel Eliyahu at your Seder. Why do we have that? According to the Vilna Gaon, he says it's because you have this machlokas. Should we have a fifth cup or not? So you have it out, you pour it, you don't drink from it. And what do? When you have a question in the Gemara that ends in a deadlock. Teku. And what does that stand for according to many? Tishbi Yeshu Kushios V'Abayos. The Tishbi, Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu Tishbi. He's going to come and answer all of our questions. He's going to come eventually, Musa Mashiach, in the ultimate Geula, and then he'll tell us for sure whether or not we're supposed to have this fifth cup or not. And Mirza Hashem, at the very least, if we're not doing it now, we should hopefully move to Eretz Yisrael, perhaps do it then. And then, if not then in the full Geula, when we come, when we have the Beis HaMikdash, we should be able to raise a fifth cup and to be able to say, God, you've brought us to this land. God, you've truly brought us to the point of the Hevesi. You've given us the ultimate shvach. Maschil beganus. We talk about our downtrodden state. Messiah b'shvach. We end with not just being out of slavery, but being able to realize the way we're supposed to live in the greatest possible form. We should be zocha. Thank you very much. Amen.